Hello, poets. Welcome to Poetics, where we breathe life into the written word. I am Tamara Rockwood, and I believe poetry isn't meant to stay trapped in ink and paper. It is meant to dance off the page and into your ears, your mind, and your heart. Here on Bainbridge Island, where the Pacific Northwest meets the shore, my husband Ben and I run Bainbridge Island Press, which is a little sanctuary for poets who dare to bare their souls. But we've realized something. Publishing these incredible voices isn't enough. Their words need to be heard in their own cadence, with their own breath, carrying the weight of their own experience. And that is what Poetics is all about. Each episode, you will hear poets unleash their work in their own voice, revealing layers of meaning that only they can uncover. And we will also be sitting down with fascinating guests who have found their lives also transformed by poetry, because great poems aren't just art. They are conversations echoing throughout time. And now we are inviting you to join that conversation. So settle in, open your ears, and let's discover together how poetry lives and breathes in the human voice. Welcome to Poetics Podcast. So before we get to the poem today, I wanted to talk a little bit about the bigger circle of poetry in America, because there are more things happening with poetry than just writing, which is great. So we have workshops, there are degrees, there are organizations, there's Parks and Rec Department. But if you go all the way to the top of bureaucracy, we have the United States Poet Laureate. And some people don't know that the United States has this available. And it's relatively new, all things considered, because the position began in 1937, and it actually was not the Poet Laureate. The title was Consultants in Poetry to the Library of Congress. And that began in 1937 with Joseph Auslander. And after that, we have had a number of incredible people serving on this. So we have had Ellen Haight, we have had Robert Lowell, we have had Elizabeth Bishop, William Carlos Williams was appointed in 1952, Robert Frost was 1958 to 1959. Who else? There was Anthony Hecht in 1982 to 1984. Gwendolyn Brooks was 1985 to 1986. And after that, after Gwendolyn Brooks, they actually changed the title to the United States Poet Laureate. And so the first Poet Laureate with that title was 1986, and that was Robert Penn Warren. And then from there we have Joseph Brodsky. Rita Dove was 1993 to 95. Robert Pinsky was 97 to 2000. Billy Collins was 2001 to 2003. Louise Gluck was 2003 to 2004. We also had Donald Hall, Kay Ryan, Philip Levine. We've had Charles Wright. And 2017 to 2019, we had Tracy K. Smith. Then we had Joy Harjo in 2019 to 2022. And right now, we have Ada Limon. Those are poets who have brought so much life to poetry that they were not only recognized, but they also were leading the conversation of poetry. And what's interesting is everyone has a different idea of, or they have a different tool bag that they're bringing, and they're using this tool bag to further the conversation in their own way. So each laureate has brought a different emphasis to their position. So a good example is Gwendolyn Brooks met with elementary school kids, and she encouraged them to write poetry, and that was her emphasis. And Joseph Brodsky, I had the idea of bringing poetry into people's mundane lives. And so he provided poetry in airports and supermarkets and hotels. Rita Dove was the first activist laureate, and she brought writers together to explore the African diaspora through the eyes of artists. And among other things, she was working with Bill Clinton in the first state dinner. And then Robert Pinsky had the Favorite Poem Project, which I loved. I love reading what people what inspires them, and I loved the Favorite Poem Project. And then Tracy K. Smith created the Slow Down podcast, and that has been wonderful, and I've enjoyed it for quite a few years. Ada Limon is the host now, but Smith wanted to emphasize how difficult it is to read poetry in this time, in any time, but in this time in particular, because you have to stop and take yourself out of the moment in order to read a poem, because the poem is going to take you somewhere else. And it's very hard to read your email and to make to-do lists and to write agendas and to accomplish things during the day, and then read a poem, and then get back on Facebook, and then get back to your agendas. It's so out of time. It is a space unto itself. And so the Slowdown was a wonderful example of how to utilize new media in order to continue the conversation of poetry. And so it's lovely and is inspiring. I was hoping that this podcast would emphasize the poetry that not only Bainbridge Island Press is publishing, but also to showcase the authors and the poets that we have. But also I want to have other people come on here and to share their own local poets that they like. I think that everyone has a voice, and this is a conversation where everyone is invited. So I just wanted to highlight that just for a moment, because, as I said, not everyone knows that we have a poet laureate. They have an office. They actually have a poetry room. I believe it's in the library, and it's just lovely. And I'm jealous beyond words. Mostly the desk and the wood paneling. I like both of those. So the poem that we're going to be reading today is by Leah Haight, and she was very generous and allowed us to publish her poem in POETICS Coyote. So you can read her poetry there. Lee lives in Boise, Idaho, and she makes her living as a certified public accountant, but she has never stopped reading and writing, which is the story of all of us. I think there are very few who are able to only write. There's other things. Robert Frost was a professor. William Carlos Williams was in medicine. We all do other things, and we bring ourselves into our work, and we bring our work into our writing. So she is a twice graduate from Gonzaga University in Spokane, Washington. She has a bachelor's in English literature and a master's in accountancy. She also has a bookshelf in her room completely dedicated to poetry, which I'm pretty sure is the shelf that has candles on the side and monks chanting and fairies guarding it. That is, I don't know, I've never seen it, but that's my mental image. So this is The Hunter by Leah Haight.
The Hunter. I didn't know I was running from you until you blocked my path, hounding me until I said your name. Coyote. I was like you once, a roamer who feasted on opportunity, a wanderer primed to relish good fortune. But I killed you. I hunted and shot you, stripped you of the only thing worth keeping, your pelt, an artifact of my conquest. So don't show up now, Yodi, baiting me back to the wild with you. I don't want that life. Go. Leave me alone. I don't belong under the open sky like you do, a scavenger enduring weeks without food, a survivor dodging bullets while yipping your triumph that the hunted is now the hunter. Enough of this. Take a piece of my flesh, skin for skin, and grant me absolution.
So, when I read this, there are a few things that I focused on that meant more to me than anything. And one is the word absolution. Another is there is a past that the poet is referencing and maybe come to terms with, maybe fleeing from, we'll get to that, but also self-identity. And those three things are very interesting. The poet's relationship with the coyote is a struggle with their past and self-identity. And the opening lines establish that they have been unconsciously running from a part of themselves that they can see made manifest in the coyote's appearance. So this is suggesting a very deep-rooted avoidance of self-confrontation, which is being confronted in the poem, which is why it's so fascinating. But the theme of absolution is particularly striking because of how it develops. So first, we see the speaker's past sin. They killed a coyote. They took its pelt as a trophy, suggesting perhaps literal and metaphorical violence against their wild nature. Then the middle sections show resistance to absolution. The poet says, "So don't show up now," and "I don't want that life," which indicates a rejection of their former identity. And then at the end, in the final stanza, it marks a shift towards seeking absolution through biblically sounding exchanges, skin for skin, suggesting that redemption requires sacrifice. The speaker's self-identity transforms throughout this poem. So the past self was a roamer who feasted on opportunity, someone who embraced their wild nature. And then their transitional self, the hunter who killed the coyote, representing self-rejection. There's the present self, someone caught between domestication and wild calling, and then the emerging self, which is one person, the poet, who finally acknowledges the need to reconcile with their nature. The poem's resolution suggests that true self-change requires acknowledgement rather than rejection of your nature. The poet is understanding that absolution comes not from destroying or running from parts of yourself, but through integration. So in the line where she said, "I concede I cannot be rid of you," there is the imagery of scavenging and survival, where she says, enduring weeks without food and dodging bullets. And that suggests that this wild identity, though difficult, represents resilience and authenticity. And the speaker's initial attempt to kill that part of themselves ultimately failed because it is essential to who they are. the final exchange, offering flesh for absolution, implies that the transformation and forgiveness requires a vulnerability and a sacrifice, and the speaker must give something up of themselves to make peace with themselves, and then understanding that true change, true self-change, isn't about elimination, but it is an exchange and integration. There's so much here that is self-reflective and vulnerable, and it's something that we, at least I feel, I can't speak for all of humanity, but I think that there is a wildness that some of us have, and it is something that you have to accept, that is a part of you, and it is something that is not appropriate in the grocery store or at your in-laws' family dinners, apparently. It's part of us. And I think that this poem effectively captures this complex journey of self-acceptance, and also showing how absolution often requires us to make peace with the parts of ourselves that we once tried to destroy. And I think that is a powerful message that everyone needs to hear. And I am so grateful for Haight to share this with us and to allow us to explore our wild nature through her poetry. So thank you so much. Okay, party people, that's all for today. If you've enjoyed diving into the world of verse with us, please join us next time. We have a lot more poems to go over. We have more poets to introduce you to, more literary adventures to share. So until then, keep reading, keep writing, and keep poetry close to your heart. Thank you for joining Poetics Podcast, where we bring poetry to life one verse at a time.